you, Sharon. Thank you guys for coming. Today I'm going to talk about this couple human natural systems, but I'll be biased towards models. I'll be talking about a modeling framework for those couple human natural systems. And similar in this dissertation, I aim to answer those questions. How are those models useful, especially for conservation and development practitioners and policymakers? How are those models different from other types of models, such as statistical models or partial differential equation models? And what are the main drivers? What drives the behaviors that we see in those models? Well, the outcomes. Then I'll present you an example from my dissertation. And I know that some of you have seen my exit seminar, so don't worry, I'm not going to repeat everything, but some of the slides. And then I'll finally close with what are the limitations of those. So we're talking about a couple human natural systems, and just for the sake of it, those are some examples of those systems. Basically, where you have humans interacting with the environment. Okay, so you can have farmers interacting with their farms, and those farmers can even, they can either be thinking about expanding their farms, their agricultural land, and causing deforestation, or they can be thinking, or they can be choosing what mix of crops they're gonna plant in their land. Hunting is also a big deal, and you can talk about subsistence hunting or game hunting. Indigenous community interacting with their forests, some fishery examples, so all of those are part of those couple of human natural systems. All right, but why would you like to mimic those systems using simulation models? There are a couple of reasons. One reason is that it's actually cheaper than actual experiments. And by experiments, I mean, for instance, randomized controlled trials or social experiments. And examples of those experiments, this is mostly done by development economists, right? When they want to assess the impact of a potential intervention that might eventually become a policy. So economists love to come up with social experiments, meaning they have a population, they split the population into two groups, a control group, one group that will actually be exposed to the intervention. And then by comparing those groups, they can sort of evaluate the impact of this intervention. And then they can make policy recommendations. Okay? So you can do sort of the same thing using simulation models. And one of the advantages is that when you're using those models, you don't really need to separate your population into a control and a treated group like development economists do. You can actually simulate many scenarios to the same population. And you can also simulate some unethical scenarios, and you can think about many unethical scenarios that you might want to evaluate, but you will not be comfortable with. And those models can be a first step towards designing better experiments or either for future policy. And those are, I believe, the main reasons why people like me, are interested in those types of simulation. But how are those models different from the standard models that we often see in the literature? So to answer that, I'm just going to give you this example. It might be a naive example, but bear with me. Okay, so let's assume that you have this really simple system that you want to simulate, that you want to simulate. So wolves and sheep, and you want to simulate this relationship. So wolves, they eat sheep, they reproduce, they die, the sheep do the same. Most people capture that type of system using system of differential equations. And this is the classic Laca-Volterra models of predator and prey. And it's basically described by these two equations. It sort of looks like this. And the outcome is a deterministic outcome. So here you can see what happens to this system through time. So basically you start with a lot of sheep. The blue one represents the number of sheep that you have. The red one, the number of wolves. You have a lot of sheep, so wolves start eating that and they're reproducing, so you have an increase in the number of wolves that drives down the number of sheep. And once sheep are down, wolves cannot eat them, some of them die, and then the cycle continues like this forever. But you can sort of capture the same system using a different framework that's called an agent-based model. In this framework, your sheep and your wolf are actually represented as agents. That's why these models are called agent-based models. And they follow simple rules. So the wolves, they walk around, they eat the sheep, and they reproduce. And the sheep just walk around. And you can put them into a virtual environment that looks like this. Okay, so you have some sheep, some wolves, and you start in your lecture model room. So they are all moving around this virtual landscape. And you can see what happens to the population of wolves and sheep. And you can see that you sort of see a similar pattern, that the same one that you see using a partial differential equation model, but using this different framework with different. And this is called agent-based models. And agent-based models are often used to mimic coupled human networks. But of course, they look much more complex than the example that I just showed you. In a real agent-based model of those systems, you would see, instead of simply a plain board with some grass where the ships are moving, so you have different layers in your virtual environment, and those layers are environmental layers, so you can have information about crops, temperature, precipitation. You also have social information represented as layers. For instance, the location of a village, where your agents are located, and in this case, the agents are not animals, but are humans. Well, we can also have animals, but you also have humans as agents. And you put everything together, and you have your agents interacting with this virtual landscape. It has a lot of information. Those are the types of models that you see. Coupled network systems, human network systems. So just in summary, in those models, populations are not represented by equations, but by agents. They make decisions in a dynamic environment. And with that, you can capture emergent process. And that refers to whatever happens when all the agents are interacting with themselves. And suddenly, something happens that you wouldn't be able to predict using a different type of model. But is this useful? Right? That's the big question. And a lot of people would argue that, yes, it's a very useful framework. And after the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, a lot of economists were arguing that all the economic models that the government was using, all of them failed to project the future crisis. And many economists argue that agent-based models would do a better job at understanding the economy. And that is also, that can be extended to the role of conservation and development. So what happens in a coupled human natural system? Let me just give you this example. You can have farmers interacting with the environment, choosing their land use, and you can have many other factors that are influencing this farmer in his decision. And once you can capture this in the model, you can go back to the model and start playing with those variables. See, okay, let's see what happens to my landscape, to my farmer agents, when I change the credit, when I give more credit, when I reduce the amount of credit, when I change the enforcement, so on and so forth. So you can start coming up with policy scenarios, and you can come up with, and one of your results is having an idea of what would be the implication of such policies. But what is actually driving the behavior that you see in the models? Arguably, it's everything together. Right? All the variables that you put in the model are influencing the behavior of the model, but probably the main component is the decision-making process of your agency. And those processes, they either follow one of these three approaches, maybe more than these three, but just for the sake of it, let's stay with these three options. So the farmers, they can seek maximization of whatever they're doing. They might try to reach simply a satisfaction level, which is not really maximization. For instance, a subsistence level. Or they keep doing whatever they're doing many times, repeatedly, until they run out of either labor or money, or they run into some sort of constraint. Okay? I'll give you some examples of these actually. And there are theories behind it. So the agents that are maximizing profit, for instance, they are sort of in accordance with this homo economics theory. And I know a lot of people don't dislike this theory, but that's the theory behind it. There's a much more complex theory that's called behavioral decision theory, and that draws a lot from the field of psychology. And you can also try to incorporate it. And the one that economists most use is this utilitarianism theory, where agents, they're not maximizing profit necessarily, they're maximizing a utility. And a utility tries to capture well-being. So whatever they're trying to when they're trying to maximize their utility, that's actually how economists perceive that people are trying to maximize their well-being. Okay, and the reason why they do this and the reason why they like this is because you can capture a utility with a mathematical function. And this is just an example of a utility function that was used by some folks from the London School of Economics that were working in Bolivia. So they came up with this agent-based model that's called Spatial. And in this model, the farmers, they follow this utility function. So they're not really maximizing profit. Well, they are, but they have this utility function. And this is capturing their well-being. So they care about food, they care about leisure, social status, ecosystem service, public infrastructure, not necessarily profits. Profits not in here, but maybe it's associated to social status to some extent. They make profit by producing food. But yeah, profit's not here. Profit's not here. And there's a lot we can do. We can talk about this. I don't really want to go into there. They're not really maximizing this function. This is just a function that they have in the model. But you can have, that is a fairly complicated utility function, right? Because you have like 5 variables, and that's really a nightmare to maximize. But you can make it a more simple one. And you can assume, let's just assume that you have farmers that care about the forest area that they have in their farm, but they also care about the pasture. So you can potentially describe those farmers with this utility function, which is a function of the amount of pasture that you have and the amount of forage. And of course, if you're talking about maximizing a utility, you want to get the best out of it. So in this graph, the place where you have your maximum, where you maximize your utility is right here, right? But you cannot really reach here because if you have a farm with 100 hectares, there's a trade-off between forest and pasture. You cannot have 100 hectares of forest and pasture. So that adds a constraint to your problem. In this case, the constraint is area, but you can have many other constraints like labor, money, so much. Let me just introduce you this other concept before I move. When you plot your utility like this, you have these indifference curves. And the idea behind these indifference curves is that any point along this curve gives you the same utility level. And you can have infinite indifference curves. So you can have a curve here, like here, here. They're all like the same, but they're just in different heights. Just bear with me, it will make sense. So the idea is you might have the same utility level if you have more forest and less pastures in your farm, or if you have less forest and more pasture. It doesn't matter, it's the same utility, okay, with different bundles. But the key is, well, you want to maximize that. And that's what the maximization process is all about. So it's finding the best indifference curve closest to this max utility zone. Sorry, this really is more like a lecture than anything else. But then you can, using some calculation, you can actually find the optimal bundle between forest and pastures in your farm. And a lot of what economists do, it's something like this. This is microeconomics.
So this is just, the assumption is that the utility pasture is equal to utility forest.
And not necessarily. What drives that is actually the values that you have in those parameters. So if pasture is more important, maybe this value will be 0.8 and this will be 0.2. That means that they have more, the households give more importance to pasture than to forests. But yeah, it all comes down to the parameters that you have here. And the tricky part is to estimate those parameters. Yeah, but this is, yeah. Okay. So that's pretty simple, right? You can apply that anywhere.
That's a good question.
Yes.
So that's for your, like you're choosing area and amount of sheep there. Those need to be things that are in control of the decision making. Okay.
And that is part of the control. I mean, the constraints that I was talking about areas, but you can also have income as a constraint. And that's sort of the process that modelers go through when they're trying to maximize something, or when they have agents that are seeking to maximize something, a utility. But you can also have other approach to capture this decision-making process of the agents. And this is sort of in accordance to that constraint approach that I first showed you, where basically farmers, they just go through this decision tree. So are subsistence requirements met? No. Then they go here. Yes, they go here. Enough capital and labor for annuals crops here, crops here. Yes, then they will plant annual crops. Otherwise, they'll go to fallow. Not necessarily whatever you get out from this represents the optimal decision for the farmer. Yeah, for the farmer, but a lot of models are based on.
Yes. Question. So do all of your agents have to play by the same rule? So you could have farmer A make a decision differently than farmer B. His utility value is different than farmer B.
You can definitely do that. It's up to you to decide.
But that's, you could do that.
I try to do that in my model. I'll get there, but I try to do that in my model. And what I found is that they were behaving better when they were all in the same group, as opposed to cluster the farmers in different groups. But you could definitely do that.
But you can imagine gender differences.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Okay, And this is the example that I would like to show you. This is from my dissertation. So the idea here was to come up with this couple human natural system model that simulates how RAD payments impact land use, welfare, carbon emissions, and food production at the landscape and household levels in the end. And also, how much would it cost for RAD to actually, how much would RAD spend on payments for environmental services? And I'm not really going to go into detail this, so feel free to ask me questions. But the study region is in Rondônia. It's a settlement region. All of those squares here, those polygons represent one farm. And it's sort of the size, almost the size of Delaware, so you can have an idea. If you, on the ground, it looks like this. You have some patches of mature forest. You can see sort of the property boundaries here, and you have a lot of pastures, some regeneration happening. But then I came up with a and in the model, I have farmer agents. They look like this, and they try to maximize welfare by choosing the areas of forest, reforestation, and agriculture in there. And yes, the intervention, like I said, is RAD payments. So I simulate a bunch of different RAD payments, and I see how that plays out in the landscape. So if I offer to pay them $5, some of the farmers will say, well, that's a good deal for me, but I will preserve only 6 hectares in my forest if you offer me that. Well, while this guy will preserve 27. And they are all going through this optimization procedure calculation to select those numbers. And some of them will do nothing if you only pay $5. But if you pay 10, this can change a lot, and it's not a linear change. So maybe this guy from nothing, he goes from 5 to 10, he goes from nothing to preserving everything. Just for you to have an idea. So I have this impact evaluation framework where I can simulate payments to farmers and see what happens to their farm given the level of payments. And I can also simulate what would happen to the farm in the absence of the payment. So I have a baseline or a control. I can create a control, and I can create multiple payment scenarios, and based on those I can evaluate how that changes land use, carbon emissions, welfare, blah, blah, blah. So some assumptions: farmers are profit maximizers.
Profits.
Okay. You're right.
You just explained that.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But the reason why I have utility here is that when you're market integrated, you're under perfect labor market conditions, your utility maximization can be reduced to profit maximization. Because I don't want to get into, I can go back into that.
It's economics, we're used to it.
But yeah, yeah, I get that.
Does your perfect labor market condition address like the chart?
Exactly that, and that is the key point. So whenever you have a utility, usually when you're talking about farmers, what economists do is that they come up with a utility that's at least based on food or consumption and leisure. When you're under perfect labor market conditions, you can remove the leisure from the equation because in theory you can hire labor, so you don't really need to work in the farm. As long as you can hire labor to work in the farm, and as long as there's no shortage of labor. So that's the idea. Okay. And then the model simulates 2 types of payments. One is based on the hectare of forest, and that is similar to programs that we see in other countries such as Costa Rica, Mexico, Ecuador. And it also simulates payments that are based on the ton of CO2 that you have in the forest, and this is much more in accordance with how it works under carbon markets and what the UNFCCC pushes for RAD plus. This is the profit function that they are trying to maximize. I'm not going to explain it, but the key point in this process function is that here where they have red payments, there is a trade-off between how much they can make with conservation and food production. But this is obvious, right? If your entire farm is under agricultural use, that means that you cannot make any money from red. And if your entire farm is under forest, you can get money from red, but you cannot make any money. So they try to maximize. This is how the model looks like. I had to divide it into some subregions. I'm going to show you what happens, how the model looks like for this modest region. This is how the model starts. You have different land uses, agriculture, a secondary forest, and mature forest patches. And then I can play with these variables here. I can offer the farmers some level of payments, and then I can see how that affects the landscape. Those are all the results that we have playing with those policy scenarios, those payment scenarios. So we can see that when you're offering to pay $5 per ton of CO2, you still have a lot of agriculture going on. And when we move to $30, we basically have no agriculture happening. But these are payments on CO2. When the payments are based on hectare of forest, we see that there's not much change. Meaning that whatever you're offering to the farmer here, well, the farmer is actually looking at that option and say, you know what, I'm better off with agricultural production. So let's zoom in there just to give you a better idea of what happens. there's an additional component to this model that's often present in a couple of human natural system models, which is this spatial component, right? So it allocates the land use change in the landscape. And you can see the sort of the agricultural areas, they still follow, in general, they follow the roads. I mean, it's not perfect, but it was good enough for my committee. And you can zoom to other places in the model. For instance, here where you have larger lots, and you can contrast them to smaller ones, and you can see how those payments, they have a different effect based on the size of the property, based on the household, really. So smaller households, they're still better off with agriculture, while these guys, they allocate some of their farm to forest or reforestation, to conservation of forest. Okay. So now some summary of the results in regards to land use change. We can see that with $15 for CO2, you start to promote reforestation. Okay, you still lose the mature forest, old forest, but you start to promote reforestation. With $30 per ton, you basically preserve all the mature forest that you already have there, and you promote a lot of reforestation, but you lose a lot of agriculture. And when payments are based on per hectare basis, pretty much nothing happens. The results for carbon emissions is that when you're paying $50, you reach this zero net emissions. It means that whatever some farmers are still clearing forests, but others are promoting reforestation. So overall, you have this zero net carbon emissions. Again, nothing really changes when you're paying per hectare. This is just how much money the RED program would be spending on payments for environmental services. You can see that they change and they are not really proportional. So here, if you offer to pay $5, it will cost this amount of money to the government, for instance. But if you offer $10, well, it turns out more households will enroll in the program if you're offering $10, and then the costs, they increase non-linear. And then you have changes in welfare as well. Of course, if you're giving another option for the households, they can make more money overall. But you can see that most of the households benefiting from RED in this case are the richest ones. Okay? the welfare for the poorest ones not change much. It changes a bit, but it doesn't change much. And of course, like I mentioned, there's a trade-off between conservation and food production. So also the richest households who enroll in red, that also means that they're abandoning part of their agricultural area, and that's why there is an effect of red payments on the food production from that. Okay, I presented this as an illustration of things that you can get out of those simulation models. Right? Some policy implications would be that, well, there's no impact of per hectare payments, and the level of payments that are simulated are in accordance with other programs, such as in Costa Rica, Mexico, so on and so forth, like I told you. So if you're developing a policy, you don't want to pay that amount of money. You don't want to offer that amount of money to farmers because probably they would not enroll in the program. Okay, if you want to promote mature forest conservation, you will have to spend a lot of money, and maybe that's not feasible for the government. In terms of climate, if you just want to mitigate climate change, you can spend $50, and then the cost of the program as a whole will decrease a lot. But we need to keep in mind that actually the prices of the unit of the carbon credit, which is ton of CO2, is actually between $3 and $5. So it's way below what we would need for that region. And we have this major issue that is increased disparities. So you can come up with a RED program. You can achieve zero net emissions right from your RED program, but you're increasing disparities among the households.
So in this model, the richer households, were those correlated just with the lot size?
Yes.
Is that how you decided? So those that had a bigger lot were considered?
Yes. And it is correlated, at least in accordance with the production function, because the production function, the function which is within the profit function, is a function of area and labor. So it makes sense in the model, but yeah, you could make the case that you might have a large property and not make much money on it. But that's sort of incorporated by the way I use regressions to estimate the parameters in the model. But so those are some policy implications. But of course, there are many limitations of using those models. And some of them are related to the fact that, well, life is stochastic, and there's lack of perfect information for households, and people make irrational decisions all the time. So you can sort of address this by adding stochastic process to the model itself. I mean, it's a way to compensate for those limitations. But models will be always a simplification of reality, right? And often you need to simplify the production systems, you need to adopt default values from the literature, and sometimes, I mean, oftentimes, you have computational constraints, and you also have data constraints. You simply don't have the right information that you want to use in your model, and you need to handle that. But I hope you got this idea that overall, despite of those limitations, you can still use, those models can still be useful, and this is just a quote from this paper, where they say, well, this highlight the usefulness of simulation models as social experiments. They show what could theoretically occur by introducing external factors in the system. Coupled human natural systems are highly complex and characterized by multiple feedbacks. When applied and interpreted with caution, simulation models provide important insights that can reduce indirect negative consequences of management and improve its. And that's it. I hope you had enjoyed sort of basic introduction to those models. Thank you so much.